So we have the recording started. So hello, I'm Christy. Welcome to the Howells headquarters. We are talking tonight about online and blended learning, in particular in PE. And I'm just going to walk you through what that might be, what it might look like, some of the pros, some of the cons, and talk about the big discussions and the big debates that are occurring within PE at the moment, as we do a kind of a combination of remote learning, home learning, a hybrid school kind of live lessons and home lessons at the same time. And we will take you through some of the concepts of PE, physical activity and school sports as we go along the way. So as a starter and a bit of a disclaimer, so for me, sport, physical education, physical activity are more than just subject areas that I teach and more than just areas that I research in. So I am based in the School of Psychology and Life Sciences, where sport and exercise science sits, but I teach all my teaching in physical education over in education. So it's a lovely merge of the two disciplines, which means that I do some lecturing, in particular with initial teacher education and primary education students, and then also spend time researching movement and sports science and physical activity. So for me, movement and sport is everything, and it's not just something that I do as a day job, it's something that I do as a home life. For me, there's nothing better than being on 2 wheels. There's nothing better than being on 8 wheels, when you can have the wind going through your hair and going like at 1,000,000 miles an hour. It makes me feel awesome. So for me, movement is all about happiness, but I'm also aware that it's not like that for everybody. So firstly, we need to, when we are talking about PE and trying to get our children active from a distance, it's really important to be aware that movement doesn't make everybody happy. As you can tell from the first photo, the cycling photo, this is racing at a bike race called the London Nocturne, where you start in very much like a Le Mans kind of style race, where you run to your bike, you unfold your bike, and then you race off, and everybody wears ties and shirts as the sort of olden days. Now what you see in that photo is two total extremes of emotion. One of sheer happiness and excitement and exhilaration. Basically, I've just sprinted past the guy behind me, and a face that looks a little bit more of distress and questioning why is he there and can he keep going. Also, the guy who's a little bit blurred at the back, that is also that same emotion that's occurring there. Secondly, you might need to recognise that actually your children might not actually do movement that makes them happy. That's traditional in terms of in school. So you need to be aware of what actually makes them happy. What can you do that might be in this sort of moment in time in terms of remote learning? What can we do that's different that actually we might have at home? So my second great passion is skating, whether it be skating at over 20 miles an hour and trying to control my speed wobbles, or just messing about and playing underneath the fire hydrants. One or either of those is what it's all about. For me, walking and jogging is just boring. So if you are trying to do walking and jogging because they're nice individual activities for the children at the minute, they might just think that it's just really boring. But if we analyse both cycling and skating for a moment and we apply them to the national curriculum, I'm hitting many elements of the national curriculum here. So in the national curriculum, it says that we have to do balance, agility, coordination, control, developing tactics. So my tactic in the cycling is I've been able to slipstream behind a really big bloke, so it was a lot less effort for me to, and then I was able to zoom past him and overtake him at the right time. I'm also working on the flexibility to be able to get down underneath the water and the fire hydrants. So there are lots of things that you can do that, away from a traditional environment, that actually could make your children just that little bit happier. I'm not alone. So Fan and Zhu in 2019, they did a whole load of research over in America and found that actually the happiest form of transport was cycling. So it's all about possibly setting slightly different expectations And the third thing you need to think about is actually maybe giving a little bit of you back. So can you actually share with your children what do you do? Whether that be you've just managed to do the daily mile today, or you've been working on your couch to 5K, something that's actually shows that you are also doing this. You're not just telling them to move. That's kind of important when we're looking at things from a learning and online blended means. And as we need to remember, as Michael Jordan says, you must expect great things of yourself before you can actually do them. So why not set them challenges that they can do at home with some of their like home equipment that they actually have. So to give you a little bit in terms of context and a mini historical overview. So in 2020, Hawthorne wrote that the general population, as filtered through the media, seems really unaware of exactly what PE is and how it differs from physical exercise, physical activities, fitness and sport. And this is where possibly some of the difficulties and the possible controversial of what is PE currently, are we losing our identity, and what does it actually mean in terms of online or blended learning in PE. So Tozer this year emphasised the differences that the general public and current teachers have in terms of experiencing PE. He described himself as a 15-year-old in 1990. He's now 45 in 2021. And he talks about the lived experiences through the curriculum and how everything has changed, and we need to be aware of the massive changes that actually occurred. So in the 1990s, PE was only a subject in which you use and knew about your body, and that the movement contributed to all aspects of education. In 1992, the change became very much more divided, and there's still the same talk today of doing athletics, dance, gym, outdoor adventure activity, and swimming. By 1995, we'd moved on to physical activity and healthy lifestyles, and we were moving away from not just teaching skills, but also teaching about diet and health and physical activity levels. By 1999, we were on to physical development, so we were actually beginning to remember the early years. And by 2007, we were becoming responsible for competence and confidence. And then by 2013, because of the impact of the London 2012 Games, we also had to have inspiring all to succeed, excelling in competitive sport and physically demanding activities. So it's not surprising our parents at home who are homeschooling and trying to support PE are a little bit confused in terms of what is PE and what are we doing with it now. So Malcolm reminds us that there's this kind of like lack of shared awareness and shared language that's being used as well. In the latest gaps that have been added to the umbrella, so the umbrella comes from our Association of Physical Education, there's also been added as I said, the physical development from the early years perspective, of which people also talk about play coming under the umbrella. They also have the new curriculum on health education that has the overlap between physical activity, emotional health, well-being, and also our diet. It also then reminds us that we also all need to be happy. So that's a lot to do within just 2 hours a week that we actually are doing PE. So you could suggest that that's quite a lot to do, especially when Weaver reminds us that in 2019, UK children were the least happiest they've ever been in a decade. And also the UK Active reported that children were the least active, and our current generation were regarded as generation inactive, with 23% of boys and 20% of girls not actually reaching the medical recommendations for physical activity. Absolutely. I wondered, it's probably a misunderstanding of most subjects, but PE, I think, has become this like clump of stuff that we'll just do, especially in a 2-hour setting and situation. So our Association PE tries to define our elements of physical activity, physical education and school sport, with physical education being the planned progressive learning. So that's the idea, that this is what's taking place in school curriculum, in school timetable, and it's all about learning to move, learning, and then moving to learn. So it's developing that understanding of your body awareness, but then also cooperating with others. But this all happens in a physical activity situation, and through dance, through sport, through movement. So this is where all the language all overlaps, and it's it can be an interesting debate in terms of what are we doing and how are we ensuring the children are learning. So they define physical activity as basically everything that isn't planned. So everything that is almost like unstructured. It can include indoor activities, outdoor activities, play, adventure activities, and then also our active transport. We're going to come back to active transport a little bit later. But the NHS guide for some of the physical activity ideas for children do include walking, cycling, rollerblading, and scootering, as well as doing the housework and gardening. So it could be that actually we try and divide up when we are teaching online and we're doing our remote learning, to actually have really clear physical activity that we're sending home for activities versus PE. So what is the difference and how do we make that distinction? And then our school sport, just for clarification, is mainly those things that are outer hours. So after school clubs, or for breakfast clubs, those kind of things that we're doing. If we go back to our umbrella for just 1 second, we've got this new element that's come in from 2021 September about health education. So health education, from a PE overlap context, looks at diet, health, fitness, physical activity. So we have to try and fit that in to all of the world and our time. And one big thing, just to raise awareness rather than anything else, is that in covering the health education, there's a lot of focus just on diet and the notion of diet being food. The notion of diet of being food isn't always the case. We forget about hydration. And hydration is really important within our PE lessons. We often have water breaks, whether or not we're at school and we're able to use the water fountains, or we take our bottles out with us and actually using them. So we need to remember when we're sending sessions home for home learning, that we also have regular water breaks, especially if the activities are quite intense. So if you're not sure or not heard about water or understands about water, basically the benefits of hydration are not often widely discussed. It's much more about healthy eating. But hydration is really essential for children. It's really good for, especially for early years, to get them to understand and promote concentration levels, as well as them to get them to think. But it's really difficult for them to understand when they're thirsty. So it's something that we have to learn. It's not something that we just naturally know. And most children, particularly under 9s, don't know that they need to drink. So this is one thing linked with PE in particular, that we need to get into regular habits of, once we've done our activities, to have a drink, so that they get into lifelong learning habits. So we need to remember to add that into our lesson plans when we're doing home learning too, because that's really important. So this week is a really good week to be talking about PE, physical activity and sport, because it's Children's Mental Health Week. So this week, the Place to Be. So Place to Be is a mental health service that runs a week-long campaign every single year to try to help raise awareness of children's mental health. In case you're not familiar with the impact of children's mental health, in 2019, before the pandemic hit us, Young Minds reported that 3 in every classroom has a diagnosable mental health problem, which rises to 1 in 4 if we include emotional distress. But Place to Be have been running these weeks since 2015, and each year has a focus on how schools and education settings can help children look at how they're developing their awareness of their mental health, and also how physical activity can help them. Last year was very much all on physical activity. This year is all about creativity. So the idea of virtually creatively expressing themselves, and there should be It's not quite up yet, but there is a session on how to express myself through dance that is due to be up by the end of the week. So it's all about when we're thinking about our PE, it's about how can we try and be creative, especially when we are, I'm just going to try and make that a little bit bigger. That's better. So the thing about trying to make our activities more creative is to do with the tasks that we're setting. So Creative Me is a really good example of home learning that's occurring at the minute in terms of PE tasks from a creative point of view. And they suggest that actually this could be used during this week, during our Children's Mental Health Week. So they suggest that in particular, the idea is that you ask the key question of what are the fundamental movement skills that you'd like to develop, so the children get to choose what do they actually want to do. And then it's the how are they actually going to keep the game safe, so they understand the rules and responsibilities that are applied to the activity. And then what is the main objective of the game? So is it time related? Is it a winning? Is it a question? Is it a development? And then how are they actually going to develop their success? And then how do we make it easier or harder? So it's about always constantly asking questions. And that's the key in terms of children and how we're supporting them in particular at the moment. The other guys that have really sort of launched this week, that didn't go back to the size I wanted, there we go, is Teach Outdoors. So this is a company that promotes learning through discovery and has offered ideas and suggestions for well-being, in particular to help with movement. We have to remember that PE isn't just about the physical, it's about developing the understanding and knowledge of the physical. So we also need to develop the next generation of sports reporters, sports analysts, sports photographers. And as the national curriculum suggests, we need to get them to learn how to evaluate, how to recognise their own success, and also to compare performances. So we really do need to get children to talk about movement, to understand movement, and to also be able to explain what they're doing, how they're doing it. So these activities from something such companies as Teach Outdoors can be quite useful as complementary activities to some physical activities. So they're all posing questions to try and get children to articulate about movement or about the space that they're actually moving within, and the side consequences, it also helps with their movement. What we have, I'm not sure if you have seen these, but I will swap to just show you for a second. Swap screens. Go to this one. Okay, so what we have, I'll just enlarge it in just a second, but I'll just explain if you're not familiar with Olive and Mabel. So Olive and Mabel are two dogs that are owned by Andrew Cotter. Andrew Cotter is a sports reporter, and in the middle of March last year, he found he was suddenly not doing any work. So what he started doing, in particular on Twitter, was filming his dogs and then reporting on the news of the dogs, so that he could keep up to date with actually analysing performance. What we've done with the children in some of the schools that I've worked with is actually use them to actually video elements of their family life and then to report on it, because they're trying to understand movements. Because you're not going to be there always with them to go, oh, you're working in a zigzag direction in a forwards pathway. They can get out of the habit of talking in a movement way. So what we're wanting to do is to actually get them to really focus on understanding what is happening and how to commentate on it. So then that will help them with their evaluation and analysis skills. So let me turn on my speaker, and then hopefully we can have sound as well.
No added sweetness, full-on taste.
So into the final minute and Olive in possession, but this is where Mabel is strong, chasing the game, using that intensity. We saw it in the semi-final, staring at a slightly torn cloth rabbit for over 7.5 minutes. And perhaps a few signs of overconfidence from her rival, a bit of showboating. Needs to be careful. And there's the change from the classic hold. Still placed on the outside, though. Great technique. And a glance at the youngster who shows little emotion, but her mind will be empty. 20 seconds to go now. Olive closing in on victory and that coveted prize of being told she's a very good dog. One paw to control and a switch. Now Mabel sensing this might be a chance. Still waiting. Still believing. And you wonder what Olive is doing here. Only has to hold on. Going to the upright, though. High tariff with no opposable thumbs. High risk at this stage. And it's gone, and Mabel takes it. No mercy from the younger dog, who takes this victory just as time runs out. A famous win built on patience and sheer belief. For Olive, only thoughts of what might have been, but only herself to blame. She's given this one away, and that will hurt most of all. Bad dog. Into the close moments of this contest to see who can disgrace themselves more on a walk. Olive dominating early on, eating 3 kilos of grass and upsetting a small child. But Mabel finishing so strongly here, taking herself off to stand in this fetid pond just to please herself. It's not even that warm today, just standing, letting all the unpleasantness soak in. And this might well have shaken Olive, wondering now if she needs to go back and roll in that very poorly squirrel in the trees, which got her shouted out a few moments ago. But she might have to try something, because Mabel is piling on the pressure here, doing nothing at all, and that's the beauty of it. Come on, out you get. There we are, no recognition, no recall whatsoever. A stare that says, I'm doing what I want, and I have zero respect for you. And I think there might be a move by Olive, a response to this effort by the youngster. Yes, there it is, joining a rival again. Absolutely no purpose to it, not fetching anything, just wandering round. Synchronized spin. A nice touch. Now both of them wondering how to finish this off. Well, no point in shaking yet, you're still in the water. So there's the hop, beautifully done. And there we are, shaking all over my jeans. Even Olive enjoyed that one. She knows that she can still take it by shaking over the furniture back at home. The tail wag of apology doesn't even mean it. I'll just stare at the trees and think about getting a cat.
So what's wonderful about those small little clips is the use of language that he has. And because he's used to being a sports commentator, he actually uses all of the language that is actually really important in terms of describing the movement, describing the action words, and doing the play-by-play in terms of actually what is occurring, even though it is just about 2 dogs. So it's about trying to have that sort of element of fun and engagement in terms of what are they doing and how are they doing it. So in terms of, if we look at the school day, there is lots and lots of movement that occurs normally in a school day. So a school day from 9 a.m. to 3:10 is 371 minutes. In that day, a typical child would have 60 minutes for lunch, 30 minutes approximately for eating. That means 30 minutes of movement opportunities. There is 15 to 20 minutes of morning break, 15 minutes of afternoon break, which you normally have as an infant, and then 60 minutes twice a week of PE. Now, if we add active transport on top of that, so we're talking maybe a 15-minute walk to school, 15-minute walk home. On days that have PE, you have potentially 2.5 hours of actual movement time in a day. So it's kind of really interesting to think about in terms of what are you providing for your children within a home environment? Have we basically got enough movement time for them? Because if the commute is from their bedroom down to the kitchen, that's not really enough of an active transport. So it could be that our argument could be that we need to factor in more time for play, we need to factor in more time so that they can learn physically. Our whole PE definition at the beginning was learning to move and moving through learning, and learning through moving. So we need to make sure that these opportunities to keep refining these PE skills are there throughout a homeschool environment. So this is really important when we think about the Child Obesity Plan of Action Chapter 2. Don't worry, you didn't miss anything on Chapter 1 in case you were worried about it. But Chapter 2, what it tells us is that as schools, we have to be responsible for delivering at least 30 minutes of the total 60 minutes of moderate to vigorous physical activity for children and young people. So it's not surprised that you can see these sudden media worries about the state of the nation and whether or not children are getting obese, when actually in our homeschool environments, they might not be having these kind of movement opportunities that they would normally. So my key message really is that we're trying to remember to keep the education in the physical education, both when we are having them into school and when we are learning online or when we are doing this hybrid. So the key things that we need to think about is making sure it's planned, progressive and differentiated. So there are a number of different options that everybody can access. We're making sure that we have the learning domains of PE. So these are three. We'll come on to those in just a second to recap for those of you who can't quite remember them. And it's also about blending early years to engage and infuse, but it's all about the questions. So these are the things that we actually are trying to focus on to make sure that we get in the different age groups from early years, Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2. But we also need to recognise it's a really complex thing. So in terms of it doesn't all fit one. That's why from a PE point of view, we're trying to make sure that we are making sure it's planned, it's progressive, and there are opportunities for all. Because basically, PE is rather complicated. And it is all of these things, and these are all of these things that we're trying very hard to do and to make sure that we have in our online learning too. What we have though is Philippa did some lovely examples of early years. So Philippa is an education, sport and health consultant. She's developed Move with Zip cards. And she's mainly because when we came to lockdown 2, we found that there was quite a lot of children who were not as advanced in terms of physical development as we were expecting because of lack of movement opportunities. So she made a real focus on developing activities for our early years to make sure that they were planned and they were progressive and they got them excited. I mean, who doesn't love the theme of space and going to the moon? So what she does is she suggests asking the questions about how do they feel about going to the moon, how do you think they would move on the moon? And then in terms of her cards, she's got these hot rock cards. And so a hot rock is basically, it can be a scrumpled piece of paper, it can be a ball of socks, it can be a ball. It doesn't matter what it is, but it then makes it all accessible to everybody. She then offers these chatter cards for afterwards. So the chatter cards give prompts in terms of questions for what did you love about that learning. Also, she includes vocab that is occurring throughout the session, and these can be done independently, but probably with a bit of help in terms of reading the cards or in terms of the home environment. Because it's really important, because in 2014 a lot of our children were 12 months behind if they came from a low disadvantaged area. 1 in 8 were arriving with low levels of physical development because they couldn't do things like ride a trike or a scooter or throw or catch or kick. So in post-pandemic or middle of pandemic, there's probably a lot of children who are struggling to be at the level that we're expecting. So our Key Stage 1 teachers, you might very well be doing a lot of early years activities with them, and I would suggest some of the cards like Move with Zip will be useful. In particular, we found that after lockdown 2, in the media, it was reported that the impact of lockdown, in particular on children, was the use of fine motor skills. So they had lost that fine motor skills. They had lost the ability to use cutlery. My friends in Italy asked me, what have they been doing if they haven't been using cutlery? That was an interesting cultural difference that I hadn't actually had as a question. So these are the 3 areas that we need to be thinking about when we're planning, even when we're online. So how am I getting the cognitive element? How am I getting the social element? So am I offering enough questions? Am I offering enough key vocab to actually get the children to still progress in a physically developed way? So the social can be difficult in terms of if there's anybody at home for them to actually be doing the social with. But it's about trying to have that. If they don't have that at home, how are you having that in a Google Classroom to then still have the conversations to help improve confidence or collaboration? It can be things like a combined dance. So you do a dance, then you share it with a partner, and that person has to copy and repeat it and then add it on to a second dance. And you pass the dance round the group till everybody's added on and learned the dance. So it's all about looking at alternative ways to still be social from a distance. We have 3 areas that we're still trying to teach. These are our 3 fundamental areas that we're trying to do with our children. So locomotive skills, stability skills, and manipulative skills. So moving skills, stabilizing, and then holding stuff skills is probably the best way to think about it. But what's really nice is that actually the Department of Education suggests that we could do this in any way we like. So it means that we can have real creativity in terms of how are we going to do it and what are we going to be doing, which is actually really cool because in terms of what we might be doing is we might just be using the resources that we have at home. So I've been teaching a lot of online PE through the use of balloons, socks, teddy bears, paper, Lego, the use of my window, where we've been using reaction walls for coordination and control, throwing and catching from socks because everybody's got socks at home, and then Lego in particular for our fine motor skills. We've also done things like just welcome everybody into my home and see what life is like here by using the bears to understand movement patterns. So actually pacing the bears out into relationships, into pathways, into directions, so we get used to talking in that movement vocab. Yes, they are all from a claw because I have insane skills on a claw, and yes, the one at the front does have a mask on. The use of photography is really important, and a lot of parents at home have mobile phones that they can actually take photos of the children, not necessarily the children themselves, and within your Google Classrooms you can actually look and analyze their movements. So for example, if you're doing throwing activities with them, it doesn't have to be javelins, it can be socks. You can look at just where they have landed and you can give them feedback on where they have landed if you know their starting position. So if everybody's starting in the same way, you can then still analyze photography of where things are landing and offer feedback. You can also offer feedback in terms of their movement. So this is little Ginny. She's doing a forward roll. She is totally using her knees to help her stand up rather than the balls of her feet. You can see that because she's squishing her knees together. So we could set her challenges to be doing next at home or in school just from the use of photography. So it's about trying to use technology that's there for you, which is also really cool. So I just wanted to break down what I've been seeing as the pros for online learning from PE. There is real social connectedness. So if you can get all of the children to turn the cameras on at the same time and you can do a live lesson together, just them seeing each other can actually have that connection that they might not actually have had before. So you can have that bundle of fun, and you can have competitions, and you can have activities that are going and copying and repeating and having them in little mini breakout rooms in your Google Classrooms. And that might be something that's really important to help their happiness, their well-being, but through a physical education point of view. You can have fun and enjoyment. You can have giggles as well with them as well, which is good. That sense of communal experience of we're all doing it together, and then they also can visually see you doing the movement and looking at how we are doing. It also really allows for creativity. It includes inclusion of life-wide objects and activities. I never realized that I was going to use my window as a reaction wall. I never knew that I was going to be using Lego to be analyzing movement and movement elements. But it has been really useful in terms of what we're doing. What we found as we head towards upper key stage 2 is that actually it allows for some cultural and gender freedoms, in the sense that if some of your children are having difficulty understanding their body and their body changes, they can actually just turn their cameras off. So actually they can have the freedom of being involved, they can have the freedom of not being watched or not feeling like they're being watched, or you can actually set up on some of the tech that you as the teacher only see them, but their camera isn't viewed to any of the other class. So we've had reports in from some of my colleagues in Roehampton and Northampton that actually for some of their Muslim girls, they've had the cultural freedom that actually, because they're at home totally by themselves, they can take off their scarves and they can dress in sports kits that they've never had that opportunity to do before. So for them, they've been absolutely loving it. Also, it's been a really creative use of the environment. So the snow that came recently was an amazing experience, and I really encouraged all of my trainees and my school teachers out to actually use the snow. The snow in terms of sledging was brilliant. You looked at control, coordination, how many could actually go on a sledge and still make it down clearly within the COVID guidance of families rather than friends, or what other equipment could you use to balance on. So here we're actually using a boogie board, which would normally be used in the sea. Because we didn't have a sledge, we used the boogie board to actually go sledging on. So it was, what other environments could you use to actually still go on speed? And what we were looking at here is the number of times that you could use the same element of snow and how much faster was it going, or did it slow down? So we were problem solving using our environment, making lovely links across to science to make John Paul very happy, but we were using our environment, and then obviously fine and gross motor skills to be creative to build our snowman as well, and obviously the clearly very proud photos of this. The cons though, that's the other thing that we need to think about when we are getting super excited about live and online and hybrid PE. There is this increased anxiety that everybody's watching. So it's about trying to still develop that safe environment, because you are in a little black box potentially if you're doing it in your Google Classrooms or via Zoom, however you're doing it, that actually you're going to be picked up as doing wrong movements if you're doing a live lesson. So it's about trying to suggest general key elements that you want to improve with your children, and looking at ways to actually give them feedback without going, hey Johnny, you seem to have your legs around the wrong way. So how can you actually have a quick chat conversation with them to get their feet around the right way, or how can you make sure you're giving them praise? You might also find that there is no safe space for the children to actually have the area. The other thing is for them, that actually makes them feel worse. So it actually makes them feel more isolated by doing something like keepy uppies in the back garden with a football to work on their coordination and control skills. That would be my whole purpose of it. But actually, the impact of that is that they feel more isolated because all they really want to do is play football. So it's about that. How do you get that balance between the two? The other thing is I've had some tutors and some colleagues and buddies who are just not keen on letting people into their homes. So they don't want to have an invasion of, because you need a big space. So when we do gymnastics, I have to clear the lounge, I have to move the sofa, I need to have the big screen, and just to have enough space to do it. It's also really hard to sort of think about doing swimming. So swimming, we've had to problem solve on. So there's been a lot of swimming on chairs, a lot of swimming on cushions, a lot of swimming just looking at arms, and then how do you safely get your legs going so you can still get the skills going, so nothing's impossible. I think that's basically my take-home message of the day. The other cons to think about is the restricted style of learning that you might feel you have in terms of PE. So it's about trying to think about how can I just not do and they repeat? How can I actually set them a problem, set them a challenge, and then get them to come back? So it's okay to set them a 2-minute timer to go and do something, to practice something, and then we're coming back and we're looking at it. It kind of depends on whether or not you've taught them before, whether or not they trust you. Sometimes it's a bandwidth issue. And then sometimes, and this is really important, you have to remember to do home risk assessments. So for me, I have never had the issue that I'm going to kick the lights. However, if John Paul was in my session, he would be kicking my lights, doing cartwheels all over the place. But for me, I haven't even thought about that because I'm too tiny and I would never kick the lights. But you have to be aware that actually, okay, you have to offer some guidance in terms of risk assessment in terms of their own environment. The Association of Physical Education suggests lower physical activity levels than high intensity, just because you're not there to help support them. And also talks about ensuring there is supervision if you're trying to advance them a little bit further. They also remind us to look at the lights and what are you going to do with a puppy dog who wants to get involved too. So this is my whistle-stop tour of PE online, live, remote and hybrid. But basically, PE is really important, and that's my one of my many take-home messages from today, as I've realised I've said that phrase several times now. But basically, PE can mean so much, and the children are probably missing out more on physical activity, active transport and play times than we probably are really appreciating. So when they do come back to you face to face, you might find that their physical education levels and skills and abilities are a little bit lower than where you might be expecting. So it's like, okay, how can we upskill them whilst they're away from us? And how can we keep inspiring and motivating them to carry on? So these are all of my contact details if you want to get in touch with any more questions or follow me on Twitter. And this is my book that I would recommend because it's mine. Okay, so that is me.
Oh, Christy, that's fascinating. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed that.
No problem.
Do you have a little bit of time now for some, questions?
Absolutely.
From audience and we're still doing the recording, but we could.
Should I start the recording?
Should we stop the recording? People might be more comfortable